Hello and welcome to another Ben Lister conversation. Welcome along. As you know, each week I chat with the great and good of the world and the UK to talk about their radio journey and their radio story. And today's guest is no different. He started his career at Hospital Radio and has been on stations such as Radio York, Fresh Radio, Stray FM, and he was also part of the Metro network, BBC York, Sun FM, and you can now hear him on the Late and Live show, which is a networked across Sunday Night Late and Live, which is networked across all different radio stations across the UK, and it's the one, the only. It's an honour, it's a privilege. Mr. Les Gunn. Hello, Les. Welcome along.
Hello, Ben. I hope you're well. Thank you for that nice lead up. I didn't realize I was so old, but clearly I am with the amount of experience that I've got.
You're experienced in the radio industry, and we're here to chat about your radio career today. So,
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. It's always nice to be able to sort of recall some of the things that happen because when you get to sort of your late 50s, you start to forget certain things that happened when you were younger and you need a little bit of a refresh. So I've probably done what you've done and just had a look at the stuff that I've done. And I always find it quite fascinating, actually, seeing people's CVs and stuff like that.
yeah, and did you ever get to work with? I know he did bits and bobs at TFM and other stations. Did you ever get to meet James Whale at any point? The late James Whale. I know you.
Sadly, no. I used to listen to James because he was a very accomplished and clever man when it came to being behind the mic. Very capable guy as well, especially with his stuff at Radio Air as well. But sadly, no, never actually met him. I arrived at TFM just after Stanage, who, of course, James Stanage, who was more sort of predominant in the Northwest, but he was doing the phone in at the time at Radio T's TFM as it became. But I just literally arrived just after he left.
Nice. And also, you also had greats such as I don't know if you've ever came across them. They've been guests on this show. Simo, Paul Robinson.
Yep. Know of Simo, know of Paul Robinson as well. We've never actually sort of met up, but yeah, big names in the radio industry. So again, you don't realize actually there's so many names, so many people that you know of but have never met. But that's probably the good thing about the great thing about radio. It's all about the voice, isn't it?
Yeah. So where did your journey begin? We're here also to do it. Where did your journey begin?
My fascination with radio started off probably at the age of about 11 or 12. I was one of these that was a massive fan of late night radio at the time, and I used to have a little transistor radio that I used to literally take to bed with me. And at the time, I used to listen to Radio Tees as it was. And the guy that was on at the time who did late nights was a gentleman by the name of Graham Robb. And Graham used to have some characters on his show, including Rita the Cleaner. And it was just fun. And I thought I'd really like to do this. But of course, at the age of 11 or 12, it's an aspiration more than anything else. So I started off loving sort of being under the covers with the radio, listening to it. And then the more I thought about it, the more I wanted to do it. And of course, when it comes to parents and what are your, career aspirations, how you want to move forward, the biggest problem of all is your parents are like thinking, oh, get a proper job. And it was something that was always, within my sights in terms of what I wanted to do. So from listening to the sort of transistor radio under the covers in bed, at the age of 16, I moved away from the Northeast fairly quickly, actually, and moved across to the Lake District. I wasn't doing any radio there, but then I moved down towards the Southeast, and in particular, Reading and London. And just before I moved from the Northeast, I decided to contact a hospital station in Middlesbrough, which was based at what is now James Cook Hospital. And it was South Cleveland Hospital Radio. And I was given the opportunity to do a show. However, I didn't last long because I was fired. Because if you can be fired, I was fired basically for presenting a show that I shouldn't have presented because the presenter didn't turn up. So me being eager, I thought, well, I'll do it. Anyway, the guy that ran the station has never lived it down and made an apology to me years later, which I thought was quite funny. So from that at South Cleveland, I then ended up at Maidenhead Hospital Radio in Berkshire for a short time. And that was quite interesting because they used an old BBC mixing desk, which rather than having faders, it had pots on it, and there were dials for the faders, which was quite an interesting experience. But I didn't stay long there because I moved into London, and when I moved into London, I was there for quite a few years. I joined a pirate station called Raiders FM. And wonderful guy by the name of Mike Summers who ran it. And he was based in Clapham. And I always remember taking cassettes and stuff, which, of course, at the time would normally have your jingles on and all that kind of stuff. And it just gave me an even bigger sort of buzz in relation to it. From there, I made contact with Gary King, who's now on Smooth. And Gary used to work at Radio Top Shop. And he's a great guy, really is. And basically, it was just good to have connections at the time. And I always knew that despite having a career that wasn't radio led, I always wanted to do it. And at the time, I was doing basically working in the catering in the hotel and restaurant business. And in London, from there, my parents, who'd opened a bar and restaurant up in North Wales, asked if I'd just go up and give them a hand to sort of set things up. So we're talking, 1987 now. And after that, I realized the local station up there was called Marcher Sound. And I kept badgering them. And of course, at the time, I was sending out lots of letters that were, I look back on some of them, rather vigorous writing. And I can understand why people probably thought at sort of program controller, program director level, why I'd probably be a bit of a handful. But a gent by the name of Paul Mewes, who was the program controller at the time for Marcher, gave me the opportunity to do a show. And I did one show, and it was an overnight show. Remember overnights? An overnight show, and I got paid £7.50. I felt really lucky. And it was 1 till 6 a.m. And I never did another show because I was told I sounded like Jimmy Somerville on speed. So I was quite flattered by that. But from that, I just even more got the bug and I really wanted to do more. So from there, I ended up going and doing a month of late shows at Radio Wyvern in Worcester. And whilst that was going on, that was 1988, and I was still applying to various stations, including my own station, which was TFM up in the Northeast. But I was given the opportunity to go and do overnights down at Red Dragon Radio in Cardiff, which was a wonderful, wonderful place. Great people. I did overnights. I then did the traffic news into the morning on the breakfast show with Mike George. And I was there for about a year, but all the time I had a hankering for wanting to go back up to the Northeast. And it was great fun. I'm mindful, by the way, Ben, that I've probably just been jabbering away for a while. I don't know whether you've got any sort of questions.
No, it's just a flowing conversation about your life, sir.
Right.
We'll just carry on where we mean to go on, and
yeah, sure. So from there, I had been constantly badgering Radio T's TFM, And I'd already had a knockback from a gent by the name of Peter Craig, who was at Radio Tees. And it's strange because I've actually got the original notes from when I sent my demo tape in, and basically what he said to me on those notes. And again, it's educational for me because I needed to learn a little bit more about what I needed to do to get in. And then it was Nick Piercy, who at TFM was the head of presentation there, and Brian Lister, who was the station boss. And I got the opportunity in 1989 to go up and basically become part of the presentation line up there. And it was a wonderful, wonderful period, which was around about 6 years, but there was a little bit in the middle where I decided I wanted to go and do something different. And I went down to Buzz FM in Birmingham, which was a bit of a renegade station, which BRMB hated at the time because of the fact that it was just run by a complete renegade who's no longer with us, a gent by the name of Chris Carey. And he had a very interesting way of expressing himself when it came to the radio industry and what he thought of the IBA, Ofcom, or now Ofcom, of course, and broadcasting standards and stuff like that. But he did make stations sound great, and Buzz FM sounded $1 million. It really did. Had a whale of a time there. Unfortunately, as with anything, he then turned up one day with some pinking shears and basically cut all the cables for the mixing desk and decided that the station was going to close down. So I was looking through some press cuttings, actually, of stuff that we generated in the local press at the time with the closing of the station or with it going off air for a period of time. But it was a great opportunity. But I was lucky in that Brian, the station boss at TFM, kindly said, come back. We want you to do the phone-in. So that was brilliant. And up until 1995, I was doing the phone-in there. And then there was a change of management. There was a new program director that came in, and they decided that they wanted to move on and do something different, which I thought was absolutely fair enough. So I'd always had a very active interest in doing traffic and travel news. And so what I did was I set up my own business, which dealt with providing radio stations in the Northeast and North Yorkshire with a travel news service. And at the time, it was all about faxes, monitoring stuff from the police and various sources, local garages and stuff like that we used to call at the time. And all of this was done from my office at home. And within a very short space of time, Metro Networks, who were the big cheese at the time, who later became Traffic Link and now, of course, Inrix, they got wind of the fact that I was doing stuff in the Northeast. And I was lucky enough that later on that year in 1995, they bought me out and asked me to become their regional operations manager. And I set up their operations that covered the Northeast and Yorkshire. So it was a catchment area of about 2 million people. And it was great fun. I knew that it wasn't in terms of longevity, because again, you kind of get an idea of how businesses are run and things like that. I knew that it wasn't going to be forever. But I was happy that we'd set up the broadcast base in Middlesbrough, for example. And so there was another office over in Manchester. And we had Flying Eyes at the time. God, remember them? We had Flying Eyes that used to operate out of Teesside International Airport, and there was Manchester Airport as well. And we had one in Yorkshire as well. So it was great fun, absolutely wonderful. So Leeds Bradford was the base for the Yorkshire aircraft, and I had a wonderful time. Did lots of reporting from the air, so that's where my real deep interest in mapping and traffic and all that kind of stuff came from. And it was something that I used as, if you like, a sidearm, because I realized that, as with the radio business, you realize nothing's forever. And from there, I was with Metro Networks until 97. And then after that, I started freelancing again. So I went to the BBC and did some bits with them, but also joined Stray FM. And whilst I was at Stray, I started off freelance, then became the breakfast presenter, then the program controller. Then I was doing promotions and sales and stuff. And I'm really proud of the stuff that we did at Stray FM, because in my sort of time there, Stray FM was a wonderful catchment area of Ripon, Harrogate, Wetherby, and it was quite an affluent area where you had a really large proportion of the listenership were Radio 4 listeners. Very popular, the BBC at the time, Radio 4, Radio 2, and then it was Stray. Anyway, I was pleased that after the 5 years that I was there, and I met some fantastic people whilst I was there, it was very pressured. I'm not going to say that there weren't the odd wobble days. It happens in life. And it's where I met wonderful people like Ray Stroud. There was Glenn Pinder. There was the fantastic Roger Kirk, sadly no longer with us. And Roger was just an absolute stalwart when it came to broadcasting at the time, because he'd been involved in radio stations in Yorkshire, and he just had an amazing voice. And he sadly passed away whilst I was actually at Stray, which was a terrible loss to both the station and to me as well, because he was just a great guy. He really was. And you tend to find these kind of gems locally, but then they're not national names. They don't necessarily need to be national names. He just had a great aura about him when he was on air, and it was a real sadness when he passed away. But Stray itself was an absolute massive success story. I worked with the great Anne Dyson, who was absolutely focused on sales, and as the MD at Stray, she and I, and along with Ray as well, we produced some amazing figures for the station. I think, if I remember rightly, it was the first radio station that, for its size, because it was a small station, its catchment was about 130,000 at the time. It was the first station that generated £1 million in sales in a year. And it was phenomenal for that size of station. And we increased the audience share from 30 to 40% over the period of five years. And it had just a wonderful audience. We made some great contacts, and it was great fun. And whilst I was doing that, I then, of course, started working over at over the hill in Skipton, and started doing some radio for what was and what became Fresh Radio. And before that, of course, I was also doing some. I was a very busy person. I was doing breakfast on Stray, going across to Skipton, doing sort of mid-mornings or afternoons. So it was a very full day in terms of radio. But when you're young, you do lots of things like that, which is really nice. So as we came towards sort of the end of the 90s and into the 2000s, I realized, obviously, computerization, which was very big when I was at Buzz in Birmingham in 1993, I realized that computerization and technology was literally going to become the lifeblood of the radio industry. And in the back of my mind, I thought, I think I need an exit strategy in terms of career if I move, if I don't get my contract renewed, for example. So I then decided to go to the police. And it was something that I'd always wanted to do. And whilst I was at Stray, I made the decision to become a special constable. And I started working with North Yorkshire Police as a special. And I was there from 1998 to 2006. And it was great synergy for me, because even though, of course, you get that sort of thing where, he's working in the police, he might be giving all the stuff to the news team at Stray FM. That never happened. It was just more a case that it was nice to give something back. But what it also gave me an appreciation of, and this is where my traffic news sort of experience, if you like, was just added to, is the fact that I basically was trained in the elements of traffic policing, which I loved, absolutely loved. And so from there, I thought, right, I'm going to join the police. And again, using the whole, premise of communications, I became a dispatcher with the police, which was fantastic, great fun, really, really enjoyed it. And I was there for 4 years. And then around about 2007, sadly, my mum passed away. And that was a great transition for me, a great time of transition. And I decided after that I was going to do a little mix of everything. So I joined Traffic Link again. I was doing some sort of work with them. I joined Sun FM up in the northeast, which is a fabulous station in Sunderland, and the great Simon Grundy is still there as well, which is wonderful. And Simon was my boss at the time, and I had sort of virtually carte blanche to do what I wanted, and they got good results out of it. I was really, really pleased. As I said, I then, of course, became an editor and broadcaster with Traffic Link again, based in Middlesbrough and Birmingham. And that was up until about 2009. But during this time, I'd also realized that what I wanted to do was I wanted to set myself up, excuse me, just in terms of sort of continuing the whole sort of radio thing, if you like. I wanted to do something that would be useful. And obviously, after I decided to do some stuff with both Radio York, I had a period where I was the general manager at Fresh Radio over in Skipton, which formed part of being on air as well for me. I then teamed up with an ex-colleague of mine who I used to work with at TFM, who was Jeremy Gartland. And Jeremy and I have remained friends for, goodness me, 30, 35 years easily. And I became sales director for a company called Gartland Gunn Media. And Jeremy basically had a playout system called Gabriel, which he still does. And I use it for my show now. And basically, it's software that he uses on his station, the station that I helped him set up in the Northeast, which was Zeltland FM, based in Redcar, now covers Redcar and Middlesbrough. And it was great experience because we sold the system to other stations around the UK and in Europe. Obviously, there was a lot of technology stuff that was happening at the time, which was wonderful. And I think that sort of dovetailed in with the stuff that I did with the police. But I always had the radio bug, and I always knew that my bread and butter wasn't necessarily going to come in terms of the money side of things from radio. So it was good to have something that paid me well, that wasn't necessarily radio connected, but was all about doing sort of communications, if you like. And then 2007, I joined the Talk of the North. In fact, I do have to also mention that I spent some time doing shows for Alpha 103.2, doing sort of freelance stuff. During that time, again, Brian, who was my old boss at TFM, then went to Alpha. And so I ended up doing some shows for him on there, almost like sort of ins and outs. And again, it was down to when I had time to be able to do stuff. So there was lots of sort of undulation, I think is probably the word, undulation in terms of the stuff that I did. So after joining Traffic Link, I ended up as one of their overnight editors in Birmingham at their base at Quinton up until 2009. But I'd also started doing stuff with the BBC Tees, in fact, and formerly BBC Radio York as well. I was doing basically a quiz show on a Saturday and doing fill-in stuff, and it was great fun. The BBC, completely different approach. I always remember trying to get used to the idea of having a producer, because of course when you're actually working in the radio industry, you realize that when you're working in the commercial sector, self-opping, as it was called, was always just commonplace. So to have somebody answering your calls for you and vetting your calls was completely alien. And I do remember struggling the first couple of shows I was on BBC Radio York. I was just used to, in between the songs, hit the phones. And of course, the producer behind the glass would say, "Oh, no, no, you don't need to do that. I'll do that." And I was thinking, God, this is luxury. But it was good fun. And it was just another way of doing things, and a lovely team at the time at BBC Radio York in particular. And it was great to do stuff at BBC Tees again, a station that was very much sort of on my doorstep at the time. And then from there, oh, blimey, now then. So we're moving towards sort of 2009, aren't we? I was approached to go and do daytimes, basically 10 till 2, on what became what came out of Alpha 103.2, which was Star Radio Northeast. So I was asked to go back to the Northeast from the Midlands, which I did. And I was doing that for about 7 or 8 months, doing weekdays, coordinating marketing for the station. And it was good fun. I really enjoyed it. But all the time, I was always very aware, as you do and as you get older, that nothing's forever. And then eventually I went back to the Northwest to become a senior editor and weekend supervisor for Traffic Link, formerly, of course, Metro Networks, now in Rix. So I was dealing with editing and also a team of broadcast staff. So it was good fun. Really enjoyed it. Again, it kept me in the broadcast sphere, and I was doing little bits of stuff. And also, I started broadcasting and doing some shows on the LGBTQ station Gadio, which is based in Manchester. And then after Traffic Link, I became their business development manager. So I was putting lots of things like sales and sponsorship strategies into place for the station. We did very well. And I was also still presenting on the station as well. And then after that, I was there about a year. Then moved into marketing and customer services. But in 2014, I became a radio course tutor for the wonderful School of Sound Recording in Manchester, and using all of the radio contacts that I gained over a period of many, many years, I was able to pull in their expertise, and which helped students. And some of them are now in the business, which is wonderful. So I was there for about 2.5 years doing the sort of radio course tutoring stuff. And throughout all of this period and before, from 2006, I basically set up my own voiceover, media creative and consultancy business, which was called Gunn Media. And again, within that, I was still doing radio. I was still doing bits and pieces of freelance stuff, which was great. And one of the really fabulous things was the fact that I was able to use my skill, my expertise and my knowledge to help others, which was always something that I had in mind and something that I always wanted to do. And I was really lucky in that I featured on a number of radio commercials that went out across the Northeast, Yorkshire, some national as well. And probably for a lot of people that are into gaming now, I used to have I suppose some would call it a mic drop moment, where and even in my current job, where I mentioned the fact that I was one of the voices on Grand Theft Auto 4. Now, to me, it's not a big deal, but to lots of others, it is. And you'll find me on Grand Theft Auto 4. I was in a game show called I'm Rich. I was the voiceover with an American lady. But if you go to the credits for it, just to prove that I'm definitely there, I asked them for a copy of the game. So even whilst I was doing my voiceover stuff, there was still a heavy connection with radio, and I absolutely loved it. Really, really good fun. And then after that, again, just using my knowledge of sort of traffic media, my love of sort of traffic in general, I joined what it is now National Highways. I became a motorway traffic officer. But my interest in radio just never waned. I always wanted to do stuff, and I was still doing my voiceover stuff and some sort of part-time radio stuff with Zetland FM. And of course, when Zetland went for the license, I was part of the team with Jeremy, who's the chairman and station manager, who basically put all of that knowledge that we had from our time at TFM and other stations, because I'd worked on other little projects as well whilst I was up in the Northeast, and we set up what is now still a thriving station. And given what we have in the community radio industry at the moment, and I do think there are still shackles that affect the industry, which are such a shame, because they shouldn't be restricted in the way that they are. And I hope that Ofcom eventually starts to, and I know that some restrictions have been lifted, but I hope eventually that Ofcom just says you're free to do what you want. Because to me, community radio is now the new local radio, as all of the existing local stations become, conglomerates, if you like, of much larger brands. And I understand the reasons why that they become much part of much larger brands, because of course it makes for them economic sense. And the sales market is nowhere near the same as it used to be. Local sales used to be really, really strong. Now people have so much different media to be able to utilize in terms of getting their message out. And I think the stations that survive are the ones that embrace that. And there are some fantastic stations out there. If you go on to the likes of Radio Garden, which I'm on all the time, I'm a bit of a radio tart when it comes to that, because I just love listening to different sounds, to different stations. Some of them are fantastic. Some of them are okay. Some of them might need a bit of work. But again, that is the radio garden, as it were. You've got to expect that there will be the great, the good, and maybe the ones that need a little bit of work. But it's been a great sort of experience for me. And then, I moved basically from my job in National Highways in 2023, and I now have an office-based job working in a massive control center. But all that time, I've still done radio and still really loved it. And one of the things that I realized was the fact that during the lockdown, and the lockdown was hugely important for the radio industry, because as well as it having an impact in terms of sales for businesses that were closed, etc., it also had a communication element that I felt was absolutely key. And that was the fact that people were suffering. You'll have to excuse me. I'm just going to get a glass of water before I choke. I realized that people were suffering, and I include myself in that, because I had suffered with an injury whereby I couldn't see a consultant at the hospital because of lockdown for nearly 6 months. Excuse me, I'm going to cough. You can edit that bit out, Ben, because you're a professional. And I realized that, like me, I was affected as a result of the isolation. And also, the thing was, we were consuming media, and by media, I mean radio, telly, social media, that was all negative. There was all so much negativity out there because it was all down Yeah, we'd clap for everybody on a Thursday, but it wasn't about that for me. It was, how were people feeling effectively having to be cooped up, and not be able to have the freedoms that as human beings we would normally have. And so what I did was I knocked a few heads together with some people that I knew in the industry, the great Richard Kell, who's synonymous with radio in the Northeast. And I approached Richard and I said, how do you feel about us doing a show for a couple of hours, Monday to Thursday, live, and we'll call it the Lockdown Late Show? But within it, its heart, its core is about the ability to keep people cheery, cheerful, raising a few giggles and things like that. And we started out really well. We had 23 stations that came and took the show and loved it. But of course, over time, as things got relaxed, you kind of realize that you can't sustain that. And of course, we had a budget of zero. Literally, there was no money in it. We were doing it purely because we loved the medium and we loved the fact of how it made other people feel. And so we rested it. And I still had the bug within me. And I thought, there is something else that we can do. The technologies out there that's available, the likes of IPDTL, which now I'm, Kevin, IPDTL, I've got a lot of time for. He's a great guy and he helps me now with the show that I do now. And I'm very grateful to In Quality for their help. And I decided, again, with Richard's help from the Northeast and with some other broadcasting colleagues, Simon Harding, who's been Simon and I met when we were at Buzz FM in Birmingham. He was very prevalent on radio in the Midlands and a great broadcaster, a wonderful, empathetic broadcaster, and a good friend of mine who's in education but just brilliant on the air, Jess, and also another ex-colleague of mine who's our paths have sort of intertwined, but particularly he was at Radio Wyvern as well, a gent by the name of Colin Bray, and we all came together over time and we started to do Sunday Late and Live. And Sunday Late and Live is coming up to its 5th birthday. Again, a show that's been produced with no budget, which is great because if you listen to the content, you'll realize there's no budget involved in the content either. But we have a lot of fun. It's all about laughter. The 3 premises of the show are chat, laughter, music, in that order. And we're unashamedly like that because you can go and listen to music anytime you want. Stick Spotify or Deezer on or YouTube Music. It's all there. But sometimes you just need something in between that engages. And I think those elements are really, really important. And that is why I do Sunday Late and Live. That's why my life is all about Sunday Late and Live. But I don't feel pressured by it because, you've not got some program director bearing down on you and going, oh, that link could have been just a little bit less. I'm not bothered about that. It's the quality of what we talk about within the links. And we're all human beings. Yes, people babble on. But as long as the babble is engaging, it's fun, it's relevant, and people can relate to it, that is the most important thing for me. And over the years I've met some wonderful broadcasters. I really have. Brendan Kearney, there's so many names that I can mention through the years. Nick Piercy whilst I was at TFM. Well, Alex Hall again, another big name. Mark Matthews when I was doing my sort of early days when I was at Red Dragon. Peter Milburn, John Dash. John was on the air when they used to do splits between Cardiff and Newport and stuff. And the great Mike George who used to do breakfast. All just wonderful people, wonderful names. And I've been associated with so many lovely people. The odd not so lovely, but that's life, and you move on and you've got to get down to it. But I would I think I could probably honestly say that the time that I had at TFM, of course, I met the likes of Jeremy, who he and I are. Jeremy Gartland, he's a great friend of mine even now. John Foster, for example, who's a very big Teesside man. He and I meet up for a cuppa because he lives in West Yorkshire now. He and I meet up for a cuppa and chew over the fat and talk about the radio industry and how much it's changed and what's changed about it. And, John's doing very well for himself now as well. And, lots of others, Glenn Pinder. I know that you, Ben, are good friends with Glenn, and Glenn's been on this particular podcast as well. I've got a lot of time for Glenn, and just nice people. Carl Kingston, you meet people through your radio career, and there are those that really make an impact on you. And I've been really lucky, really, really lucky. And that's probably the longest link I think I've ever done.
Yeah, and it's brilliant. And I was just in awe of you listening to you, really, because I think you're a brilliant bloke at what you do. And when you were working, what was it like? I must add as well, what was it like working for all those things? And what has been your highlight? And what has been your biggest interview and your
Oh,
greatest
blimey.
achievement?
Now you're really going to. I worked with a wonderful broadcaster who's no longer with us called Simon Nix, and Simon and I came together in two or three places actually. But I always remember Simon and I, the Radio One Road Show basically used to always go in the northeast to Seaton Carew, and they pulled out of it. They decided Seaton Carew was not going to be a location anymore for the Radio One Roadshow. So TFM did it instead. And I don't think I've ever seen a crowd as big as the one that turned up that day at Seaton Carew. And again, Simon was part of that. And it was very sad because, of course, whilst in Manchester, I now live in Manchester, and I've been here for 16 years. Sadly, Simon passed away when he was here, and we had connections at Gadio, and Simon used to do a live Sunday night show as well. And he was somebody that I respected greatly, but I always have, and I was going through the clippings actually, the newspaper clippings. Remember those newspaper clippings? Of the coverage that we had at the time, and just realizing, blimey, we've done some really big stuff. The other one that really sticks in my mind, this was actually a hugely emotive program, and I do also have to credit Tony Collins, who basically is West Yorkshire based. Tony used to do Eye in the Sky stuff as well for Radio Air, but Tony is a big voiceover now, but he at the time also did some work at Stray, and also a big name now, Anna Doble. And Anna is a wonderful journalist. She really is. And at the time, she was kind of almost starting out when she was at Stray. But the Twin Towers, 9/11, in New York, I remember that so vividly. And because Stray FM's patch was within the catchment for Menwith Hill, which was the American the American base in terms of the military, and it was a sort of listening base, if you like. There was a huge outpouring at the time, and we did a special, which was basically a phone-in that involved people from the local community, MPs, people from the American community, because that was just such a loss. And I still have the recording of that show, which was probably one of the most sort of somber, solemn, but important shows that we did. And I always remember the decision-making process about whether we should do it or not. Was it correct to be doing that kind of thing? And it absolutely was, because you listen back to the show now and you realize, my God, that was part of history. Nobody will forget 9/11. you know, particularly in our generation. Obviously, I'm getting to the age now where I can safely say in the office to somebody, oh, that was a bit Norman Collier, and nobody has a clue what I'm talking about. But that's just getting older. And you realize that people who are in their sort of teens, 20s, etc., are a completely different set and completely different generations. So they have different priorities, they have different languages, ways of speaking, and stuff. And I completely respect that. But yeah, 9/11 was probably, and the 9/11 special that we did at Stray FM was probably, you know, and the other great moment for me, again, was when I was at Stray, was the day that we found out that we beat Radio 4 and Radio 2 in the audience figures. That was just, I mean, wondrous. It was an awesome day, a real awesome day, but really enjoyable. And again, you know, doing stuff like the phone-ins at TFM, you and also Talk of the North that we did, which was on Alpha Sun, and other stations in the Northeast. Again, just great experience and lovely to speak to people and to sound people out.
Nice. And what was it? Who was your biggest interview and your most favorite interview?
Well, now then, you're going to ask now. God, this is a really difficult one because there's not one that I can honestly say really did stick out. That they were all. I mean, I naturally would say they're all great interviews, but I think for me, if I'm, you see, I always remember conversations and I always remember interviews, but when you kind of think, was there a highlight to those interviews? Was there something that was way out, or was there something that was wacky? I can't honestly say that I remember. I had better interview. This sounds a bit strange. I had better interviews with listeners. um, because again, there's a kind of relatability there. When you're going to interview, you know, a prominent figure, person from pop music, you're normally fed the questions. And you're not able to be as spontaneous. You've always got somebody from PR sat at the back of you going, you can't ask that. That's not allowed. I wouldn't advise you do that. And so again, it's, you know, a bit restrictive in that respect. I think if I was to think of people from the world of pop that I've interviewed, I think one of the most interesting ones was actually when I was working at Buzz FM in Birmingham, and I interviewed a singer by the name of Shara Nelson, and she was the voice that was on the Massive Attack single, Unfinished Sympathy. And then she went solo. I understand, because I did a Google search, she's been in a bit of bother involving a prominent DJ, but this was a little while ago. But it always stuck in my mind because she felt when you're in an interview and you feel like you're actually getting some depth from that interview, makes you want to do it all the more. She was one of the good ones. I remember interviewing Go West, if you remember those from the 80s and the very early 90s. I remember Go West. They were lovely, absolutely lovely, and very hunky at the time, I do recall. But for me, I can't honestly say it's like, oh, well, I've interviewed the Prime Minister. There's been none of that for me. I've not done anything where I've thought, "Ooh, that was particularly good." And so, yeah, I'd probably have to let you down a little bit on that one.
What? Yeah, yeah. And what
I have.
I must ask as well, what was it like working in the northeast and the northwest, and what's it like now being in Manchester? Because Manchester is now the media hub for the BBC and others. What's it like working in Manchester?
Well,
Like
yeah,
based in Manchester, and what are you closer to? The Media City or the Hits Radio compound at Castle Quarry?
Castlefield. No, I'm hits the hits base and greatest hits radio is actually closer to me in terms of it's the other side of the city centre. So I live to the sort of east side of the city centre. Castlefield is sort of to the southwest. I'm always at Media City because, of course, I've still got, contacts and friends that work within the media business. So I'm always nipping over for a coffee and a catch up. It's good to have a gossip. So I'm always, but because, I mean, with the radio show, for example, it's all done from home. So, and as with anything, the technology now allows you to do stuff from home. I was having a conversation yesterday with an old radio friend of mine, and we were talking about the fact that there is nothing like live radio. I mean, everybody talks about, oh, have your voice tracked, blah, blah, blah. It's not the same. I defy anybody to turn around and say, oh, I love voice tracking. It's so real. It's not. And the thing is, yes, it's easier. It saves time, but there is nothing like being on air because, of course, with voice tracking, if you make a cock up, you go and do it again. And the thing is, listeners love it when you cock up. Simple as that. The amount of times, the gaffes and things like that you do on air, it's all about, for me, and really important that people see your human side. So to have this kind of almost like drone-like sort of approach to do, oh, I'll just do that link again. And you're like, why? Yeah, there's been a bit of a flub there. I had a giggle as a listener and I enjoyed it and it was good. And I realize it makes you more relatable to me. So I do have a bit of a sticking point. And even, my friends now that are still connected with the broadcast, the radio business, that ring me and go, oh, can you do this show for me today? And I went, is it voice tracked? And they go, yeah. And I went, and I'm just not that big a fan of doing voice tracking. I'm not saying I'm not going to do it if somebody's going to pay me £100 a shift, which of course is the biggest joke going. Again, I'm not going to say never. It's just more a case of it's not as the aesthetic's not the same for me. Doing live radio is just wonderful. It really is. I probably waffled on a bit there, but
No, you didn't. You're fine. And what's it like? What was it like being in the radio? And what is your? I know we've asked that. What track is your guilty pleasure music wise?
oh, I knew you were going to ask this
What
question,
track
Ben.
would you throw in the
It's
bin,
awful.
dustbin?
Yeah. You see, I have such an eclectic mix of music that I love. And if I was to go onto my Deezer and shared my Deezer favorites, people would look and go, ooh, that's quite varied. And literally, I I can't pinpoint my most favorite track. I love songs that are emotive because I am a bit of a crier. I do love songs that connect you in some way to a time in your life, breakups in particular. I do love songs that give you a happy feeling in your head, without a shadow of a doubt. And to me, to my mind, to have that sort of ultimate playlist, I wouldn't be able to choose one song that is the pinnacle for me. I wouldn't, I'd choose a few songs that I would say, oh, they're great hour starters for a radio show. They're fantastic starters for a radio show. But personally, I would say very eclectic. If you wanted, I'm more than happy to tell you my top 10, but I couldn't tell you my most popular one out of those. I go literally like a pendulum. I swing from one side to the other when it comes to a favorite in terms of music.
Who was your favorite? Who was your chart show host back in the day?
Bruno Brooks. Bruno Brooks at the time was doing it. Dr. Fox, of course, Neil Fox. He was doing it, and Simon Mayo as well. So those were doing, but I wasn't. I know a lot of people used to do this of recording the songs without the links on a cassette player at the time, particularly in the 70s and 80s. But I wasn't really into that. And I wasn't a massive fan of constantly being glued to the chart shows either. It was a bit strange. Well, still am. I was a bit strange in that respect. But yeah, those were the names that I do recall. And then, of course, there used to be the local chart, because when I was at TFM, the great Mark Dennison used to do the local charts. So it was always nice to listen to him, because he and I were a bit naughty. A little bit naughty in some of the stuff we did at the time, but it was good fun.
Mark Dennison, another former guest of this show.
Yes, Mark and I always remember when Mark joined TFM. I think it was his, if I remember rightly, it was his first gig, and always had a lot of time, and always thought he was a complete natural when it comes down to it.
Nice. And did you ever get to meet, I know you may have met him through the BBC, John Jelson or Goffey, the great Goffey?
Goffy and I know each other, and we've got a great deal of respect for each other, because, of course, we were big on radio in the Northeast, and we've kind of followed each other, and we like stuff on Facebook and that kind of thing. Never actually, if I remember rightly, I don't think we've ever actually properly met. We might have done it in passing. Oh yeah, all right. And the great John, Mr. G, who, of course, if I remember rightly, still lives in Rydale in North Yorkshire. He's got a transport fascination like I have. So yeah, we spar a little bit and converse every now and again over Facebook and stuff, but never actually got together for a coffee and a catch up. It's always nice to think about doing these things, but of course sometimes life gets in the way, doesn't it?
Yeah, and also you should also as well after that you should and also I must not forget him, the late Richard Whiteley and his dear lady Catherine, the late Catherine.
Well, Catherine, of course, worked at BBC Radio York. And so we had very limited dealings there, because, of course, she was mainly, she would do some stuff on a weekend if she was doing freelance stuff, but she used to come in and do sort of weekday stuff. So if I was ever in on the odd weekday, but she was always lovely, always nice, but never actually met Richard Whiteley. But it would have been nice to have, because he sounded like he was great fun.
Nice. And who inspired you on your journey, and who would you like to say thank you to?
Oh, now then. Well, first and foremost, my old boss at TFM, I've got a huge amount of gratitude for. That was Brian Lister. Brian taught me so much about the business, so much about communicating, so much about what was effective and what wasn't. And I always remember going through links with him in his office and stuff. And at the time, of course, you know, the age that I was, it was like, oh, why am I doing it? I was like a teenager. Why am I doing? But you realize years later, the reason why he was doing that is because he wanted to make you a better broadcaster, which he did. Well, I'm saying that. And he was he was inspirational to me, and I'm grateful to him and also to Nick Piercy that they gave me the opportunity to do what I did, because I would like to think that Brian thought of me in the sort of time that followed as I got more into the schedule at TFM. I was his kind of Mr. Fix-It. So I would go into shows where he thought, oh, the audience figures are not perhaps where I want them to be. Maybe we can get a little bit of a lift. Because I was always, the figures speak for themselves. I was always pretty good at doing stuff like that. So, yeah, I would say Brian almost certainly that I would like to say a big thank you to. And who else now then? Because you see, if I don't mention somebody, I'm going to really annoy them. Because nobody didn't think anything of me. Anne Dyson. Anne Dyson, who was at Stray FM, who was one of the people that I believe was a visionary for me, and she placed so much trust in me as well, and it paid off dividends. And she was one of these people that, as well as being an MD and looking at flow charts and looking at graphs and looking at sales figures, she had a heart as well. So I have her to thank a lot in that respect. I'm trying to think who else. Probably, yeah, Jeremy Gartland, who Jeremy and I, because of the sort of enduring friendship that we've had, we lost contact. And actually, this is something I didn't mention. We lost contact for a period of time after our sort of journeys in the early to mid 90s, because we used to go, we were DJs and stuff like that together. So we used to do the clubs, not Gala, by the way, or Mecca. We used to do the clubs, and it used to be a weekend thing because, of course, we were doing the radio stuff at the time. And then there was a period of quite a few years, and he and I met up again because I've got a great love for full English breakfasts and the breakfast butty. And I was doing breakfast on Stray, and one morning out of the blue, the phone rings on the main phone-in number at Stray FM. And it was Jeremy. And he just said to me, "Oh, I've had a big operation, and I'm having a butty at just on the outskirts of Harrogate on the A59. Do you fancy meeting up?" So we did. And from there, because I always knew he was great on air, I basically said to him, "Well, why don't you come and do a show?" And that started his radio journey again. Because, of course, he'd gone into work in IT. He'd done the same thing as me and realized that he needed to have a backup, because radio is not forever. And you've got to have a backup there. It's really important. And he'd gone into IT, and he's a very, very successful IT manager. And for me, that was the start of another sort of segment of our friendship. And I do have him to thank, because there were various things that, he's done through the years. And obviously with our partnership, if you like, Zeltland FM, that he's enabled a lot for me. And again, he's also been a great support, because we mustn't forget that through all of this, everything's not always happy in life. And there are times when you need some support, and nobody should ever not have somebody that they can rely on just to say, "I'm struggling." And hence the reason why Sunday Late and Live came about, and that was about a mental health struggle, and wanting to help others. And I mean, I'm pleased to say, so yeah, Jeremy would be definitely on that name. And going back to Sunday Late and Live, I mean, one of the great things is there's now 32 radio stations that take the show, and that's growing. Every week there'll be inquiries coming in saying, "Can we take the show?" Which is brilliant, and I love that. No generous offer is refused. As long as somebody sends me a Mars bar, I'm fine with it.
And what station would you like to be on? What station would you like to be on in the future that your radio garden listen to?
Oh, now then you talk. Well, this is really difficult, because I listen to that many stations. I'll tell you what, actually, and this is only from like the last few days, the weekend, I was listening to stations in the Southwest, and two stations just stuck out like sore thumbs, but not in a negative way, because they just sounded great. In fact, actually, three in the Southwest: Devon Air, Radio X, and Radio Newquay. And they were all just sounding great. Local, relevant, not too in your face, just great. And I just thought these are really good stations. But there's lots of stations around the country that are good examples of doing stuff. Stations, in the Northeast, Pride Radio, that I know that I do some stuff for, and particularly they take Sunday Late and Live. In the Northwest, there is the likes of Ribble FM, Radio Burnley. There is Rossendale Radio as well. Tony, who I know, who's done such an amazing job at that station. And there's some great stations if you bother to have a listen.
In demand as well with Rick Horton.
Yeah, well, funnily enough, actually, Rick, he and I have spoken basically on social media, and Rick, I've got a lot of time for because he's a great guy, and if I remember rightly, Rick was on back in the early 90s, the Bacardi Beat Club chart, which I used to do on TFM. Rick also did, and I need to go back to that photo to make sure it was him, but I'm pretty sure it was. And Rick was actually on the same tour that we went on. And of course, years go by and you realize sort of certain names and stuff like that, but we had great fun. We had absolutely great fun. And, Rick and I, by the looks of it, I think we've kept our good looks. I use the word loosely in my case, but I think for me, when I listen to, and I'm doing more of it at the moment because I'm recovering from a shoulder operation at the moment. And so I've been able to do a little bit more listening around and listening to stations. And there are some great little stations out there that produce radio where you go, I know why you're at the heart of your own community. And I must admit, I do hate the word community nowadays, because to me it's about local radio and that connection that local radio can have within a community. But that's just a personal thing. I know that there's lots of stations out there that love their own communities. Some of them sadly have had to close because of financial difficulty, and I feel that's an incredible shame, and we should do more to help them, but maybe more at legislative level in terms of government. But that's probably a completely separate point at which I'd hold up a banner and go, let's protect the stations that mean so much to communities.
Yeah, and I forgot to mention as well, if Rick Horton or someone in another station in the Northwest, if Rick Horton rang you tomorrow and said, we'd like to take Sunday Late and Live, would you take him up?
Why not? I mean, Sunday Late and Live is open to any station that's interested. And I get that some stations, and I've had the feedback from some of them where they say, oh no, we want to keep it local because that's our USP. And I completely get that. I completely get that loyalty, but I also get the fact that there is a reality to what we do nowadays in terms of the whole local offering. To me, and this is only a personal thing, if I was going to think about what am I going to do local, 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. On a weekday, and at the weekend, daytimes are crucial to be local. Absolutely crucial. However, Sunday Late and Live it's live, it's topical, it talks about stuff from the UK. Every now and again, it might throw in a local reference, but it is relevant, and it's also at a time where it's not going to impact on your ad revenue, because of course it's taken as a live show. There's no ads unless there's sponsorship credits in there. There's no ads that can be inputted at local level. And of course, that's one of the things that some stations might think that might not be so good, but it's not going to impede because of the time of day in terms of the thought process that, that makes us less local. It doesn't at all. I always think radio is all about being relatable. because the same things in each community are going to be talked about in one way or another, and the same kind of subjects. So last night, there will have been lots of conversations that will have gone on. Oh, did you see who won I'm a Celebrity? Oh, what about Strictly? There's always those sort of national subjects that you might make local, because you turn around and say, well, I was down the dog and duck a little bit earlier on, and Bill was telling me, and so on and so forth. So I've got my own views on radio, but I respect the fact that station heads might turn around and say, I don't want this because it takes away from my locality. But to be honest with you, does it really take away when it's a Sunday night, 10 till midnight? I would argue that, but I respect everybody's opinion.
And you're a good bloke, sir. Yeah. And where do you see yourself in 10 years' time? And what would you say to your 10-year-old self?
Oh, blimey. If there was a 10-year-old me floating around, I'd be a bit worried. Right. Well, in 10 years' time, I honestly don't know where I'll be. I might have gone off this mortal coil. I don't know. The one thing that you realize after the age of 50 is you think, oh, I'm on a downward slope here. And that's not meant to be morbid. It's just the reality of life. I think in 10 years' time, if we're still doing Sunday Late in Life, my God, that would be a miracle. But things may have changed. I might be taking it a bit easier. I might be on a chaise lounge somewhere. Be even better if I knew what it meant. But yeah, I don't know. Because I'm always very aware of the fact that I say to younger people now, where do you see yourself in 5 or 10 years? And of course, you're talking about your upwards trajectory on a career. I'm on the downwards trajectory in that respect, because when you've kind of seen it, done it, and you think, is there anything else for me to learn? Yes, life is all about learning. Every single day you're learning until the day that you basically go off the earth. But where the radio industry is concerned, I'll never stop learning about what people are doing, but I'm now a lot more concerted about the fact that I know what I like and I do what I like, which I think is really important. You know, I don't like being stifled, and I think the creative process is such that you listen to broadcasters who have the ability to have that creative freedom, and I love listening to them, because sometimes it's like, oh, that's a bit out there. That's a bit different. And I always remember going back to, that note of thanks to the person that I think creatively in radio gave me a great amount of feedback and knowledge. Brian always said to me, if you've got a reason to do what you're doing, then it's okay to go away from the format. If you're able to say to me afterwards, I did that because this happened and it was relatable to that. And those things always stick in my mind. And even now, when I'm preparing the show, there's always a tenure or more tenuous natures to some of the links, because you think I can link that, and that. The listener might not notice it as much, or maybe they do, because listeners are quite clever. And those elements to me, but I don't know. In 10 years' time, yeah, I could be doing absolutely anything, sweeping the streets, Ben. I don't know.
You could end up on a national radio station, and some of the national radio stations, I think, have got it right. This is my personal view. I'll give you
Yeah.
3 examples: Virgin Radio, Boom Radio, and Nation. Them are the 3 brands that have got it.
Yeah,
So,
I certainly love listening to Radio 2, because again there is a certain element of freedom there. I do struggle, if I'm really honest, with the fact that there are so many good presenters out there who at local level should have been given the chance nationally, because to me, just because you've got a huge following, on social media doesn't guarantee that you'd make a great radio presenter. And unfortunately, I've heard some absolutely naff stuff on air from people who might have a million followers here, there, and everywhere. But it makes no difference to me because you don't relate to me when it comes to radio. And there's been some really naff decisions made about some names, unfortunately, but that's down to the decision making of the people that are in charge. I wouldn't stop somebody who I know is a great broadcaster going on to do national. Unfortunately, that seems to be the model nowadays. Oh, you're not on telly, you haven't got any social media, and you haven't got 50,000 people that interact with you every day. Forget it. Bye. That to me is not a good excuse, because I even think from the smallest acorns, some great broadcasters can become national without a shadow of a doubt. So, yeah. What was the question again?
Where do you see yourself in 10 years' time? And the last little bit, you've just answered it, sorry. And the last little bit is, what advice would you give to the next generation of radio broadcasters? And name me your top three radio stars that you would like to see become national in the future.
Oh, no, this Ben, you shouldn't have asked that question. That's really awful. Right. First of all, the radio landscape has changed in terms of how people get into it, and of course, you've got all of the academies, that you know, and the media schools, and all of this kind of stuff. But there's only so many opportunities now to get into the business, whereas before there was always this thing of, you know, in the early days when I was doing stuff, it was like, oh, you start out on the night shift, make your mistakes there, and then you get better, and then you get moved on to early breakfast, and then you might get afternoons or evenings, and then you might go on to breakfast, etc. That kind of grounding doesn't exist anymore by virtue of the fact, and partly down to the situations that I've just explained in terms of, oh, you've got a big following on social media, you're a big name here, and so we'll get you on, and we'll you know, this person can sod off, because they're only a radio presenter, they're only a broadcaster. It doesn't really matter. This other person. So I think some of those opportunities have been swallowed up as a result of bad decision making at program level. That's not to say it's happened with everybody. And I mean, I cite people like Rylan on Radio 2, hugely relatable, an amazing broadcaster. And, you know, somebody that I would just say absolutely a natural. Yes, he didn't come from the normal radio route, but there are certain people that don't need to. I think for anybody that's coming into the business now, you've got to try harder, unfortunately, because it's fierce out there in terms of the competition. Have something different about you. Have something where you can turn around and say, this is my USP. Everybody can say, oh, well, I can broadcast. I can give the right inflection. I can read a script, but have something that's different about you. Have something that's, and I always say, show your vulnerable side, because I'll tell you now, show a little bit of vulnerability and you tap into a listener market that is completely different, because people instantly will relate to something that's gone on recently, in the distant past, in their life, where they turn around and say, wow, that person gets me because I was doing and feeling this then. They know what this is like. So yeah, be relatable, have a USP. Don't think just doing this is that was is the most important thing. Think about the stuff that you do, day-to-day stuff. People love to listen about, you know, and yet I'm not bothered about, oh, this celebrity's doing this. I couldn't give a toss unless it's something that I follow. And just the most relatable things. USP for me is just be different. Be different. You know, I love regional voices. Regional voices, I think, are really important. You've got a great whole voice, by the way, Ben.
Thank you.
Um, a great East Yorkshire accent, which is lovely. But I think those nuances, it's not all about having a mid-Atlantic voice. And hi. It's not about that. I love to hear regionality. I love to hear dialect. And those things I think are quite important.
Yes, and it's brilliant. And I've enjoyed chatting with you today. And thank you for
You too.
joining me today, Les.
You're very welcome, Ben. It's been a pleasure, and I hope if nothing else, somebody will get the odd giggle out of it and take something away from it.
I have to send later on because Glenn Pinder asked for a copy, so I have to send him a copy of this interview later on.
Oh, I'll get the invoice sorted for that, Ben.
I'll get I'll have to send Glenn Pinder the interview, and I may have to send it to another friend of mine who likes listening to my interviews, and friend of Glenn's, Paul Bromley, as well, who likes
Oh,
it.
Brommers, yes, absolutely. Me and Paul. But we he of course went into, I believe, the rail industry, and Paul's a great guy. It still sounds great on air as well. You see, the thing is, I'm now going to annoy so many people. Well, you didn't mention me. I'm going to annoy so many people, but they know who they are. They know who they are.
Yeah, and as I say before we finish, I remember, is it Zetland, the one that's by the sea?
Zeltland is in the Beacon at Redcar, yeah, absolutely. And of course, I forget, Redcar now, of course, is classed as in North Yorkshire, as is Middlesbrough. So Redcar, Yorkshire, rather than Redcar in the Northeast. But yeah, it's in the Beacon, wonderful base from which to broadcast. And I've had loads of photos that I've done whilst I've been on air there. To look out at the sea on a sunny day and the beach and across to the cliffs at Saltburn, quite simply one of the best views anybody would want to do. And get in touch with Jeremy if you'd like a look round, because honestly, it really is quite special.
Well, I have been to the Pride Centre up in the northeast.
Oh, right. Yep.
The home of
Again,
Pride Radio.
that's right. Richard, I was actually up at Pride a couple of weeks back, seeing Richard
I
and the
was
team.
visiting the neighbours from what was at the time Affinity.
Oh, yeah, of course. Yeah. Well, Affinity is another station that takes Sunday Late and Live as well. And Kyle has done a great job with the station. So, yeah, absolutely.
I think they've moved out of the Pride Centre now, Affinity.
Oh, right. Yes, I believe so. They're in, they've converted a sort of premises that's nearby in Pelor, I understand.
Yeah, brilliant.
Good
Anyway,
stuff.
uh, thank you for joining me today again. And I'm going to let you go now, but thanks for joining me, Mr. Les Gunn. Thank you to you for joining me as well. Don't forget this show will be available in full as a podcast and the best bits on the Ben Listerine Conversation radio show. So thank you for listening. And don't forget to join me same time, same place next time for another In Conversation. Thanks very much for listening. And all that's left to say is bye-bye for now. And that's a wrap. And back to the studio. Bye-bye.